some of the effects of stigma? And we're going to touch on physiological effects in a second, so don't focus on the physical body yet. What are some of the effects of stigma? We're talking about it. We certainly bumped heads with it over all. I bet all four of us would have our own set of stigma stories, and we'll probably be able to share some of those tonight. But I'm wondering, from your perspective, what are some of the effects of stigma? What does it really do to our development, to our ability to kind of move through life?
I think in general, having stigma against mental illness, it stops people from seeking help. So then they'll have instances where they'll have violence, and this can lead to homelessness, as well as not being able to function in a job because you're not getting the help you need. So that can certainly interfere with that part of your life. You can also have issues with forming relationships and being in long-term relationships, and even ostracizing your family. So it can be quite perversive having that stigma around it and people not being able to seek help.
Jacob, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I actually listed a couple of things that I thought were associated with some of the problems with mental health stigma, and a lot of them were already covered. But the first one was an inability to recognize the symptoms of mental health in yourself and your family that could lead to mislabeled or misunderstood behavior. One of the other problems with stigma is that it can lead to an inability to express mental health needs, which can also lead to undiagnosed mental health conditions as well. Unfortunately, feelings of not being able to live up to societal expectations can also lead to sort of low self-esteem, feelings of low self-worth. It can also lead to self-destructive substitutes for untreated mental health issues, such as substance abuse, alcohol abuse, or self-harm. And unfortunately, these all sort of come together to sort of undermine any sort of self-esteem that you could have, and that also in itself could lead to mental health issues, mental health crises.
Wow.
Yeah, Michael, I think Jacob and Esther already cover most of the effects of the stigma. Something I do want to mention is the effect of stigma on institutionalized policies. In terms of, as a clinician myself, there is a lack of systemic and institutionalized policy to protect, not just to protect, but also the most important part is to aid individual living with mental illness to seek the help they need, because they constantly be stigmatized against. I know as a clinician, it's not something that I share openly, just because it may affect how patients view me, how my colleagues will treat me, and their doubts about my ability to care for patients. So something that is very, very pervasive indeed.
I was just talking earlier today about the effects of chronic stress on the physical body, and it reminded me of what we were going to talk about right now. We're going to talk about it, in fact, for the healthcare professionals. Patrick, you and Esther, if you address this, what are the physiological effects of stigma? So you buy into, you've adopted self-stigma, you begin to believe some of the messages that you've received. How does that begin to show up in your body in very negative ways?
I think you'll start to see them in ways that, having tummy aches, headaches, constantly feeling fatigued. And so they're looking for a physical ailment, but really this are just those effects of stigma and not being able to, get help for your mental illness showing up in your physical body. Other ways you might see this manifested is things like insomnia. You're not able to sleep, or it could be on the opposite end where you're spending a lot of time in bed. You can also feel just worn out and tired daily. And that, again, just goes back to the reason why, the overarching reason and the reason that needs to be addressed, which is your mental illness. Right?
Patrick, thoughts on that?
I think that the physiologic effects on individual varies because, one person can have depression, the next person can have schizophrenia or bipolar. So the effects of stigma on those conditions are also very different. Schizophrenic patients have the reputation of being very violent. And actually, statistically speaking, they are most of the time the victim of violence and not the perpetrator of violence. So with different type of stigma come with different physiological aspects. And I think Esther touched on many of that already. I think something that I could think of is the way that they interact with the world. When you're not feeling well, if you're not sleeping well because you have insomnia, because you're depressed, because you can't get out of bed and feel fatigue all the time, your interaction with the world is also very different. And I think that's also manifests a physiological response to your environment. And in turn, it just creates this almost vicious cycle where you're constantly feeling fatigue and you're being treated as you fatigue, and you feel more fatigue over time, and feeling more stigmatized over time.
The term you just used, Patrick, vicious cycle, comes to me when I think about this next question. We're for three reasonably intelligent people, and then me sitting here talking. I'm just curious, what about stigma? I'm thinking back, for those of you that are old enough to remember the 80s, we had a first lady whose answer to the drug crisis was just say no. And as reductive as that was, I'm tempted to just say, we know better now. Why do we continue to tell ourselves these negative things about mental health? Why does it continue? Why does it persist? Why do we have to talk about expanding across generations? If my grandfather's generation, we've learned so much over the years. So can we just get at a little bit why, from all three of your perspective, why do you think it's so very pervasive?
I think the reason why it is so pervasive is fear. Physiologically, we were genetically to fear what we don't understand. And I think a lot of people don't understand what mental illness is and what mental health condition means. And the information that they receive is either from looking up to the internet, through, it's incredible source, or, watching TV and, having these shows and movies show very dramatic side of an individual living with a mental illness where they do something, quote, crazy and just out of the extraordinary. Yeah. So I think what they experience is the fear of the unknown. And when you have that fear of the unknown, there's two physiological response: you fight or you flight. And some people decided to attack that unknown, fear of the unknown of mental illness. So I think that's one of the very, very big reasons why it's so pervasive. And not understanding and not having the proper education about mental illness certainly just perpetuate the situation.
I think you're right. And before I toss it to you, Esther and Jacob, Patrick, you mentioned media images, so I wanted to touch on that. That's my background, communications and journalism, and I'm reminded of the very negative connotations and messages and stories that have been told for generations in mass media about even therapy. There was almost a caricature. You walk into an office and you lay on the couch, and it was this kind of cliche vision of what therapy was. Even the term psychotherapy, I wondered if folks have focused on the psycho, the old Alfred Hitchcock movie, and have made extrapolated from that if you have to have therapy, you must be psycho. You're somebody dressing up as your mother and stabbing somebody in the shower. And then you get, when the news tells a story about some heinous crime, and the first thing they mention was whether or not the person has a mental health issue, people, your lay people are making a connection the minute they hear that. So I wondered about that.